Hello again. Um, Excited to be adding to our body of information about Montessori today. And we're going to really begin to focus a bit more on language development, as you asked me. And I'm going to begin with a couple of activities that I did not give you much about before. And maybe you have some materials that would allow you to create something at least similar to what I'm going to show you. But these things will prepare children's hands. Um, Maria Montessori said the hand is the instrument of the mind. And when we think about how we use our hands constantly in our daily lives, the hand is so empowering. It is such an opportunity to be active in the world and to participate in the world. And when children come to us, sometimes we say they don't even have their fingers. We see them, grasping something like a pencil like this, because it's very difficult for them to hold it with their fingers, or they might hold it with all of their fingers like that. And that's a child that has a desire to be able to hold the pencil in a more directed way, but they don't have enough strength in their fingers to be able to do that. And what I have found over the years is that a child can come to me like that without their fingers, so to speak. And in a very, very short time, the child's hand can develop just by being given opportunities to use their fingers for things. So I'm going to share these activities with you. And as I say, you can see what you might have that might work. And we'll just go from there. So the first one, I need to share screen. So hang on, get back in the mode here. The first one is a bit of an old friend. We've seen this one before. This is bead stringing. And this is a fairly fine bead stringing. You could have one that's much thicker string and a bigger hole in the beads, and the beads would be larger. I have one like that for the younger children, but by the time the child is 3, typically they can handle a bead string like this that has this rather thin string on it and smaller beads. So once the child has mastered this particular activity, then they could move on to something we call burlap sewing. And this is something that honestly, the children begin very young with this. Young 3-year-old can work with this, and it will grow up with them also. That's the beautiful thing about these activities that I'm going to show you. The children begin working with them when they're at 3, young 3s, and they continue on for 3 years with me. When they're 3, when they're 4, when they're 5, even when they're 6, they still enjoy these activities. They just become much more detailed with them. And so I'll give you a bit of it. I'll give you examples of that. But this is a piece of the burlap that we use. And this piece of burlap is probably about the size of two adult hands, maybe put like this. I did not look up the metric measurement on it. I know it's 5.5 inches by 8 inches, but something around there, that's what we use. It's a nice size for the children and allows for several stitches across the way. And you can see in the middle of this piece of burlap, a string has been pulled out. This is what allows the needle to go into the burlap more easily. We do do some work. I don't plan to show that to you today, but once they've really mastered the needle, they can work with it without the string being pulled out. But it's really helpful when they're first starting off to have a line. And we even will use a piece of chalk to go across the line before they start so they can really see it and stay on that line, because then they will work several stitches across here, and we'll see some examples. So let me show you how it looks when the child is actually engaging the needle with this. And we're using a piece of cotton yarn. Again, I don't know what you might have, but maybe you have something that you could give to the children, some kind of string, and it's a very blunt needle that is, I don't know if you know a toothpick, but you can see relative to my hand how big this is. And what we want to encourage the children to do, or actually I insist that the children do this. Sometimes you see a child capable of doing this and they refuse. And if so, then they're just not able to do the work yet, and that's okay. Sometimes they will do that, be stubborn, and that's their choice. It looks like stubbornness to us, but they're just exerting their will and seeing what happens. And so what happens in this case is we cannot do the burlap sewing work, because sometimes the child will want to, instead of doing what you see in this picture, so in other words, making a whole stitch, so grasping the needle strongly to be able to put it both in and back out to create a stitch, and then pulling it out, you can imagine the child just wants to just stick it down in there and just use their finger and push it down. And then, they get confused and it gets wrapped around, and they're not really building their finger strength in doing that. So burlap sewing is done with these stitches. And this would be kind of an older child. This was actually done by an adult to just give you an illustration. But I'll give you a couple of examples of children that are about 3.5 to 4, and what they are typically doing on this burlap. Let's see right here. So this is a couple of children. One of them is still 3. The one at the bottom is still 3, and the one at the top is already 4. And you can see we track it by stapling their name tag on it. We ask them to do 5 rows. So this child at the top with the red, she's got 1 more row, and then we would consider this one to be complete. But you could have the children do as many rows as you want. I'll show you how this then grows up with the child a little bit. Let's see, I always forget to share screen. Let's see, where is that? So this is a child 4.5 that has done a lot of burlap sewing, and she wanted to do as many strings as possible. So, and they work on this. Sometimes they will just do 1 string a day. Sometimes they do 5 strings a day. So that's how we've done this work. And over the years, I've had children make like a wall hanging of a lot of them put together. And I'm sure you could be creative, and they could even reuse the burlap, pull it out after practicing with it. But of course, it's very satisfying to them to feel like they actually created something. And I'll just show you quickly. I'm not going into detail on this, but once the child has mastered burlap sewing, then they go on to do so many sewing works. This is an embroidery work. The children typically by 4, I'm giving them a sharp, small needle like you or I would use, and I draw an outline for them on fabric, whatever they choose. I enjoy drawing, and so I draw outlines of animals and all kinds of things that they choose. Um, and then they sew it with a sharp needle and using a little hoop. And from this, they make pillows, they make bags, starting with just small ones that would just accommodate one, but then also piecing them together. And actually had one boy, very ambitious. He wanted to make himself an entire quilt. So he was making something big enough to cover himself. And, but he was 5.5 to 6 years old by that point and really enjoyed his sewing. So I just wanted you to see what the potential is with sewing. It's really something that the children derive so much satisfaction from, and does allow for that development of the hand, of that pincer grasp for the pencil. So you were asking me about, the parents and what will help them to understand how this will help their children academically. I mean, you can also see how much concentration and focus that the child develops through using these needles and working on a project to stick with it all the way through. It's not an academic thing that they're doing, but it's setting up all of the same emotional floor I talk about, like a base for them to be able to persevere. And then when they start to read, to work all the way through a little page with 5 or 6 words on it, and a little book with several pages with that many words on each one, the child has already built up that sense of accomplishment and follow through and focus and ordering things. They have to be able to order, to make words and to read words. So all of this is absolutely building the foundation for their academic subjects, which doesn't even talk about math, but language is absolutely crucial. And I always see it as the other pillar of the Montessori offering for the child, the support for the child. Because there were 2 things that Maria Montessori found that were foundational for the child all the way through birth to 6, this phase. It's actually called a sensitive period, and there are lots of short sensitive periods. I'll be talking about some shorter ones as we go along here, but the 2 long ones that last for the entire birth to 6 plane of development, as she called it, are a sensitivity for order. So I may have spoken about this in the previous videos, where the child is looking to put things in some kind of order. We see differences. Some children are extremely orderly with every little thing that they do. Others not so much, not so perfectly, let's say, not so completely concerned with it being, perfectly straight and all lined up and that kind of thing. But still, for each child, there is the strongest sense of order that individual will have in their lives. And it's so that the child can make sense of the world. So it's really serving the child in their orientation to their life, in where they found themselves and being born. The other sensitive period that lasts for the entire birth to 6 period is sensitivity to language. And of course, the child is kind of changing as they're going through. So they're in different little phases of language development, but still being given a word for something, being given a little rhyme or something to say, something to listen to. Young children up to the age of 6 are just so drawn to that. It's just such a way to bring them in, to give them language for things. First of all, spoken, but then they are, as Maria Montessori found, by 3.5 to 4.5, the child is really wanting to learn how to form letters and really understanding that words are made of individual sounds. So we'll be getting to all of that in these next couple of videos. So let's see. So that I think is as far as I have it loaded for this particular teaching. And I'm gonna break this one off, and we'll go into another type of handwork that prepares the children, and then we will go on to actually writing.